Hey guys, welcome back to a series of videos that I am making for the English 2015 classes. This is the second video, so if you haven't seen the first one, I'm going to link it below and you can go check it out. The purpose of these videos is to give you guys a little bit of supplementary information about certain concepts in English that will help you improve your writing. So today's video is all about rhetoric. I know I covered some of these concepts in classes, but this video is going to give you guys some specific ways to be more persuasive in your writing. So just some more examples and some ideas about how exactly to go about improving your persuasive writing. So let's get started.
Okay, so let's start with a little history. Here we are in ancient Greece or Rome, and we have this person trying to convince us of something. This person is the smartest around, and we call them the rhetor. This is also like an orator. So the rhetor has an audience, they have a point, and they have a time. And all of these things create what we call a rhetorical situation. So the audience, the time and the place, and the point all drive this person's purpose. And his purpose is what he's trying to convince us of.
Okay, so I want to talk a little bit more about what exactly is rhetoric. So when we talk about rhetoric, we talk about language and writing, but there's different kinds of rhetoric. So first of all, something that you guys have been working with in both of your classes is something we call visual rhetoric, and that is like language for your eyes, basically. So it's style, it's formatting, it's all of these things that are appealing to us. And whether it's aesthetically pleasing or extremely straightforward and informational, there's different ways that you can manipulate your visual rhetoric to get these same things across. Rhetoric is actually a huge field right now, and what we call rhetoricians study all of these different things. So there's ideas like rhetorical listening or understanding more where your audience is coming from. But the truth is almost everything can be considered a type of rhetoric. So body language, confidence, all these things that I talked about in my presentation videos can also be a sort of visual or informational rhetoric to your audience. So these are things you should all be considering when you're, not only when you're writing, but when you're giving a presentation in a class, when you're going in for a job interview, that all these things contribute to how you're persuading the person across from you to listen to you, to give you what you want, to take you seriously, all of these things.
Okay, great, but how exactly do I use rhetoric? That's the question I want to answer here. We don't live in ancient Greece anymore, but we all could still be considered a rhetor, and that's because our purpose is to convince when we're writing. So there's two parts of rhetoric. There's the scheme, which is how the writing is set up, and then there's trope, which is different characteristics of writing. We're not going to really use the scheme, but it has things like allegory. The trope is what we're really going to be focusing on. So that's metaphors, similes, irony, personification, and these are all ways to help incorporate rhetoric in our writing. They all help you convince. So there's three main tools we use in rhetoric. One is ethos, which is an appeal to ethics. One is pathos, which is an appeal to emotions. And one is logos, which is an appeal to logic. And I'm going to dive into each of these three a little deeper now. Ethos can be broken down into three different categories. The first being the author's reputability, which is you. The second being the content reputability, which is your rhetoric or what you're presenting. And the third is the believability of what you're trying to tell your audience. So to gain author credibility, the first couple ways are easy. Just having correct spelling and grammar in an authoritative tone can really help you. The third thing is connecting to your own authority. So using phrases like, as a student of UW, because clearly you're an expert of things that's happening at UW. The last way to build author reputability is connecting to your audience, and that's saying things like, we believe, or it matters to us. And those phrases, we and us, show the audience that you're one of them. So next we're going to talk about content reputability, and an easy way to build that is by using reputable sources and sort of name dropping them. So saying things like, according to the FDA, which is clearly a reliable place. Another way to add content reputability is using what we call vernacular, and this is basically just the fancy words that are used in a certain subject to describe things. So for example, in English, vernacular could be prose, literature, rhetoric. All of these terms are specific to English. So finally, we build ethos by the believability of what we're trying to say. So part of this is understanding where your audience is coming from and being able to draw the same conclusions that they're going to be able to draw. So you can also do this by saying phrases like, "You may be wondering," because it admits to your audience that you're on the same page as them. So, on to pathos. The goal of pathos is to elicit emotions using literary devices. So, the first way we can do this is comparison, because emotions are relative. So, when you compare it to something that your audience might be aware of, it's a good way to sort of elicit these emotions. So, a great example of this is when people say, it's this generation's 9/11, because that nationwide sentiment can be related to. Another way to build pathos is by using descriptions. So you can either describe the facets of a problem. There's no food, there's no water, it was dark, cold, and lonely. And these are when you use those literary devices we were talking about. Another way you can do that is to describe the feeling or describe the emotion. So you can either do this overtly, saying it was sad, or covertly, by describing the situation that might elicit emotion for your audience anyways. So an example was saying I was alone for 2 years, which would obviously elicit sadness in your audience. The last way to engage pathos is through relation. So this is connecting to emotions of your audience. So it's sort of like the comparison before, but a way you do this is saying, put yourself in these shoes, or think about your own kids, or asking the audience to relate as deeply as they can to whatever you're trying to persuade them about. The last appeal I want to talk about is logos. And logos can be broken up into two smaller tools. So the first being logical reasoning, and the second being just cold hard facts. So logical reasoning is basically a step-by-step argument that helps you lead to a conclusion. So basically saying, since this and this is the result. So this is almost like a thesis or almost like a research paper where you're adding your points all together to lead to a conclusion. This tool of logical reasoning in this way can also be used to take apart your opposition if you see that a step is missing and so they're led to an incorrect conclusion. The second tool is cold hard facts, and that's basically what we're going to use. And that's using stats and data and from a good source to help you get to your argument, because you can't really argue with stats. And I put question marks there because maybe that's a larger philosophical question we can have a discussion about at a later time, but use your stats to your advantage.
So today we talked about rhetoric, and we talked about different things that are rhetoric. So there's language is rhetoric, there's visual rhetoric, body language can be considered a type of rhetoric. So these are all things that you guys can manipulate to be persuasive. I tried to give you guys some specific examples of exactly how to use ethos, pathos, and logos. So I just want to go over a couple of those again right now. So remember, one of the huge ways to use ethos is to be likable and relatable to your audience. So I'll just reiterate this example again, saying we. So as we are all students of the university, and then you can get to your point because suddenly you're on level ground with them. That's a great way to use ethos. For pathos, that's what I mean by using those literary devices, say like hyperbole. So hyperbole is an exaggeration. So when you're exaggerating something, saying it was the worst night of my life, and it might not have actually been the worst night of your life, but that puts into perspective the emotions that you're trying to convince about. The last thing I want to talk about is logos. So like we said, having a logical layout to your presentation, your paper, whatever, is a great way to use logos because you can't argue with how you got to your conclusion. And at the same time, using those statistics is really helpful because people are not so scared of believing numbers, if that makes sense. So if I told you that 10 out of 10 doctors believe you should run 10 miles a day, you are more willing to believe the doctors because A, they have ethos, they're doctors, and B, because clearly there's a stat taken, there was some sort of research done. Statistics are something that people believe in. So I want you guys to refer back to this video as often as you want, and I hope that you use these examples not only in your papers, but in your presentations, in your job interviews, and any time in the near future that you feel like you need to be persuasive.
So thank you guys for paying attention to this video. There will be more videos coming out soon, and you guys better believe that you are all a bunch of rhettors and rhetoricians, and I can't wait to see your writing in the future.